right? And what you see here is an increase of about $400,000. Again, percentages and the different bases can always be somewhat confusing, but what's important, and I'll talk about it in the next slide, is that we have received so far, again, it's not an approved budget yet, it's just the executive proposal, a 3% increase in foundation aid. And that's something real, and it's something that we hope passes when the budget is approved formally, and that we are grateful to all of our state representatives for pushing for that increase in state aid. The next is life allowance. So we've seen here a bit of an up and down with the money that we're getting as a payment in lieu of taxes, but we feel secure in the fact that we will be getting this about $4.2 million next year, and that's another $200,000 of additional revenue. You see here the 5% increase. Other revenue, you see here an increase of about $1.7 million. That's basically due, and again, I'll take this when I take the next slide, to tuition that we get from other districts. Tax levy, which includes the STAR payment, and STAR is something that some of our homeowners are eligible for, but it's always an offset with the tax levy, so I included it here, is zero, right? Zero increase. You see it's the same number that we have in the current year, $0 variance, 0% increase. We're really proud of this, that again, we get to use some of the money that we're getting from the federal government, some of the additional money that we're getting from the state government, some of the additional revenue that we're getting from LIPA in terms of payment in lieu of taxes, some additional money that you see here that we're appropriating from our general fund balance so that we can keep our tax levy flat. This next line item, appropriated fund balance for capital projects. You see it's a zero here in the current budget because we did not appropriate any money from our fund balance in the current year to offset capital projects. It was a zero. However, for next year, we plan to appropriate that same exact number that I mentioned in the slide a few slides ago, that $4,285,400 that we already have on hand to appropriate towards those capital projects that we have in that line item, transfer to capital for facilities. We are asking, what we're doing is we're planning at this point to add a little bit more, right? $638,000 more from our general fund balance. Now, a few things on that. Over the past, 13 or so years that I've been in the district, I've been talking about how important it is to try to have this appropriated fund balance at a relatively low level. I think when I started here, the appropriated fund balance was above $3 million. And here's the exact reason why now it's helpful that we've had it on, less than $500,000 for the past several years, because now when we want to increase it to fill the gap so that we can keep to this 0% increase in the tax levy, the absolute number of the $1.1 million is still relatively low compared to our overall budget, compared to our overall revenue sources. So we can now say, okay, we're going to increase our appropriated fund balance a bit, right, so that we can keep our tax levy level. But in relative terms, $1.1 million is not a lot of money to appropriate every year to offset the tax levy. So really happy that we're in this position where we are today. This is what I was talking about before in terms of the 3%. Final numbers will be shortly after April 1st, where we are at the LIPA pilot, 5% increase. The other revenue, we're expecting some more students who are going to be paying tuition in our schools. We've been tracking our Island Park numbers. We feel confident with where we are. We were a little bit conservative in the current year. We weren't sure about what the impact COVID would have in terms of students coming into the district who would maybe go into private schools, but we feel pretty comfortable relying now on what we've seen the past couple of years, which is significantly more tuition than we had a couple of years ago. And that's the main driver for the increase in this area. And again, here our tax levy will remain at the same level as the current year, 0% increase. Some important upcoming dates. Here we are today, March 22nd, the budget presentation that we had this evening. The 12th is our budget adoption, right? So there won't be any real new information on April 12th. It'll be an opportunity to, again, for the board, if there are any changes that they'd like to make in terms of what we presented so far. But that's the time when the board actually adopts the budget, which is then it becomes the board's budget to present to the community. Up to this point, it's been the administrators' presentations, what we'd like, what we've asked for, and then it's up to the board to decide what they're willing at this point to adopt as their budget. And then May 10th is a budget hearing, which is an opportunity for anybody in the community to just voice their opinion on the budget. It's not a chance to make any changes to the budget, but it's an opportunity for the community to weigh in on the budget. In between April 12th and May 10th is the opportunity that I have to reach out to the community and to do budget presentations at our community organizations, at our schools with the PTA, so that we can explain this budget and just try to get the message out about what's in the budget. And then May 17th is our budget vote and the board trustee election. That's the presentation for this evening. I'm happy to take comments or questions from the board. Thank you for your attention.
Any Board of Ed comments, questions? Hello,
Mr. DeVito, thanks again for the great presentation. And all the work you put into this and everyone else that helps you with it.
Thank you very much.
It's always nice to see a 0% tax levy being drafted. The board appreciates that, and the taxpayers also appreciate that. Just a question, sorry, let me go back. A lot of this is referenced on the American Rescue Plan, correct? We're relying on the American Rescue Plan.
Well, we're only relying on the American Rescue Plan for some of the additional programs that we may have put in the budget, like in past years. For example, we're really excited about the elementary enrichment program. So perhaps in a past year, we would have added that to the budget as a request. But because we have this grant, we're able to now put that in the grant and not put it in our general fund budget. That's like social worker, I think it is, that we had talked about. Another example, we know that there are real social and emotional needs that we have in our community. We knew that there was a need that needed to be addressed. We were able to then put that in the grant. So, and there's a list of everything that we talked about last year and what's in the grant, and we'll do another presentation about what's in this grant, because we're required to do that actually on an annual basis to update the community. So it's really those areas where it's been something additional, but there's nothing in that American Rescue Plan Act that I would say is really part of our baseline operational budget. It's really all the extras that are designed to try to close the gap on, what the term that they use is any like learning loss or gaps in student learning that were created because of COVID.
Great. I really appreciate that. That was important. One more question related to the budget. I know a few years ago we initiated our environmental efficiency with the air quality and solar and all those aspects. Are we hitting the ROI year on that yet? When does that start to kick in?
Yeah, it started. I couldn't tell you at this point whether we hit it or not, because the past couple of years, the use of our buildings has not been typical, right? So I think after this year, now that we have everybody coming in every day, I'll be able to tell you if we're meeting those targets or not. We have a maintenance system in place. There are measurements in place, but because of the building use since we completed the project has been atypical, I would have to wait before I can answer that.
Great. Okay. I only ask those things because of the concern that we have funding for something now with the budget going up, and then we're relying on that funding later, and then it's no longer available. Then everything gets shifted to the taxpayers.
Right. In essence, yeah.
But we're planning for that, so we're okay. Yeah. Thanks. Thank you again.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Ryan, I'll go next.
Mr. Cronin?
What is ROI?
Return on investment.
And what does that mean in terms of our energy performance contract?
So if we planned on reducing our energy use because we've installed energy efficient lighting, because we're perhaps tapping into the solar power that we have with the solar panels on our roofs, because we have new windows, because we have actual new roofs that are keeping everything better insulated. Just the little things that
So
come
it
to my
means
head.
that we're saving money?
And what's happened is that, let's say we were spending $1 million on energy, electric or oil. Now we're only spending $800,000. Let's say we reduced it by 20%. That then differential, that $200,000, that's what we're being used to pay off the work that we did. So that's the zero impact on the tax levy. So what this question is that are we hitting our targets? Are we actually spending 20% less in energy so that we have that
Well, we're
fundamental?
probably spending more than 20% less because our buildings aren't being used as much.
No, but it's still being used, even though we had fewer kids in our buildings, we were still using the the buildings. We still had to keep the heat going. We still had to keep the lights on. So,
Okay. Okay, I have a couple, thank you so much for your presentation.
okay.
I'm incredibly impressed when we get to the revenue part. But we'll wait till the end of that. I know that a year or two ago, we hired a floating nurse. And I haven't heard anything about that yet. Are we finding that one? I see that we're hiring another nurse. What happened with the floating nurse
Yeah,
that we
it's
had?
great, just not enough. So when we did our budget prep meetings and we talked about that, we're just finding that we need another nurse to cover. It's just that one float is insufficient. I don't know if maybe Ms. Brancaccio, Dr. Brancaccio, if you want to perhaps address that, I don't mean to put you on the spot, or Dr. Natali, if you want to embellish on that. But I just know that we did discuss that the one that we had a few years ago is just insufficient.
Sure, we actually have two float nurses. They cover the lunches, so one covers West and Lindell, the other covers East and Lido. And then they also get pulled for field trips, coverages in case if someone is absent. We've had a couple of leaves of absences where we need to pull them. So we end up paying agencies, since we don't have our own, at a much higher rate. So it's really more economical to hire another float nurse if we're able. There's such shortages that you can't even rely on the agencies.
And I think that was the other point, right, is that if we have somebody on staff, we have more security that we'll actually be able to get somebody when we have an absence, as opposed to being short-staffed. And I know we have some students that have needs that we have to meet, and when someone is absent, it's difficult.
So this is what I don't get. You have a floater nurse, and she can only cover lunch coverage for 2 buildings. That seems to me it's only 2 periods.
It's not just necessarily the lunch period, but that was a big impetus for the position, in that our nurses were kind of prisoners in the health office.
Right. I remember that.
Right. So they aren't only use those 2 periods, they are doing other things in the buildings as well.
The truth of it is oftentimes that's the busiest time for them, because that's when kids get hurt, and they need medical attention, and oftentimes it isn't dealt with in the course of the 2 periods, but it's over afterwards, so it's certainly a good use of staff.
So, but now we'll have 3 float nurses, right? That's what you're saying?
Correct. And you could even think of it, I go back to a teacher role in my head all the time. It's almost like a permanent sub, right? So you have someone on staff that you know that if a nurse calls in sick, or if there's a field trip where a nurse needs to go on that trip, you have someone at the ready, that you're not relying on an overpriced agency, or even if you can't get a nurse, then you're kind of really stuck fully.
Well, I appreciate that, but I appreciate that, but for one thing, we're hiring 2 nurse substitutes today. So potentially we will have my thing keeps going on, I'm not sure why. Turn yours off, because I'm talking, okay? Who else is turning theirs on? No, mine doesn't work here. We can share microphones. There you go. Okay, we're hiring nurse substitutes, so we will have our own cadre, so to speak, of substitutes. But unlike a permanent sub, where they can fill in many different spots, a nurse can only fill in one spot. So it just doesn't have the same rationale for me that, if all, how many nurses do we have on staff? There's 7 buildings, right? Maybe there's 2 people.
Yeah.
So there's 10.
Don't
What are
forget
the
the Catholic
chances?
school.
But that they have a separate nurse placed over there. I appreciate that. And when the Catholic school nurse is absent, we're responsible for replacing that person? Okay. So say we have 11. It just doesn't seem, if that's what you're telling me, that's what we need, I'll accept that.
Yes, so just to speak to the sub nurses that are on the agenda, they're very deceiving. Many of the nurses who ask to go on our sub list actually work in hospitals, and because they do maybe 3 days on, 4 days off, they like to sub in the schools when they're not working in the hospital, but we wouldn't be able to hire them on a full-time basis because they have another job. So it can be a little deceptive every time you see a sub-nurse put on the agenda.
Okay. All right, I also had a question about the social worker funded through the ARP grant. Is that a new hire? Is that somebody we hired just for this year?
For this year, I believe it was backfill. So for example, the social worker who's performing more of those ARP type of services, backfill.
What does that mean, backfill?
So it is an additional social worker that we have.
Okay, and it's not a social worker who's in a tenure position, he was hired as a grant hire?
I have to get back to you on that because my understanding is that, like, in terms of, there was some shifting in social work responsibilities in terms of who's actually covered for what. And I think that the one social worker that we had in a different building was put over to the high school to help with the students with those issues that we're getting the grant funding for. And that we had another social worker to fill the position that was vacated. So that's what I mean by backfill. So, but in terms of positions that need to be identified as somebody who's supported by a grant, let me check to see who's the actual grant.
I guess my question is there a social worker in the district who knows that their position is grant funded such that that grant funding, which is going to end in 2 years, is going to put them out of a job?
I don't know if, I haven't had that conversation. I don't know if that took place, but the other thing too to keep in mind is that perhaps there may be a future retirement that may happen.
I know, but I think when we hire people,
Yeah.
we say you're grant funded or you're budget funded.
Right.
But we don't say you're grant funded, you're budget funded.
Right.
So I've always been pretty clear
Yes.
to notice when people are grant funded to ask,
Mhm.
were they advised that they were hired being as a grant funded position?
I understand.
Because
Maybe
that-
Dr. Natali can weigh in on that.
Okay. Yeah, you don't have to wait if you want to.
Or it's in the future, so,
Yeah.
at a later date.
All right, so you'll send some information about that home this week? Sure. Great, okay. Okay. First of all, I just got the draft total budget yesterday, I did not have a chance to review it, and I'm kind of disappointed that the board is not gonna have any opportunity to talk about the budget, because our next meeting is budget adoption.
Well, we've covered every function area of the budget, so.
And I appreciate that, but I think that the way it's worked historically is that we take everything in, and once we have everything in, then we have to sit down and say, do we want what the administration has presented? Do we want to cut something? Like, I thought there was always a meeting.
Well, sometimes there is. Sometimes we've added additional meetings in past years, but I guess the point is that when we start in December and we go function by function, that there's been an opportunity, more in depth to really talk about a function area so that we can explain what the differences are. And then that if there's a question about it, the board has an opportunity to ask it. Really now it's just having everything assembled in one place, but it's nothing new.
No, but what I'm saying is, that's from
Right.
your perspective.
Yes.
From my perspective, as part of the body that's charged with adopting a budget,
Yes.
we now have to say, okay, because I just take it all in.
Yeah.
And then say, okay, if something had to go, maybe it would be, a special education teacher, or maybe it would be a floating nurse. And maybe it would be something that came from a presentation, a month ago. So that's, I think, as we move forward through this process, and I think even in past years, we've scheduled an extra meeting so that the board has the opportunity to talk about it between the time that the total budget is presented and the time that we adopt it. If I had known that, I would never have that time to review it. Just get suggested.
But I do hear what you're saying. I do hear that. But, we have, we work on process, let's say, which is actually, longer and more meetings than in other districts, because, we sent some information around it. Some districts have fewer meetings, fewer presentations, but, we're probably on the high side in terms of the amount of detail that we give to our community and the number of presentations. And I know that, you feel that maybe another meeting for additional processing time, but we can certainly do that, but it's hard to really process everything and present something when we haven't done it yet, So like, as we're presenting, we've also meeting with staff and we're considering different issues, and there's a lot, as you know, that goes into this. So if we gave it any earlier, like, for example, we would have had to present special education earlier or something else earlier. And we know in the past when we've done that, it put us kind of between a rock and a hard place in terms of the building's not ready. So that is the high school schedule done so that we can do the high school presentation? Are the annual reviews sufficiently, far along so that we have really good sense of numbers? So, there's always that give and take of, if we do the presentations earlier to give the board more processing time of the total budget, are we really dealing with as accurate data as we can, as we are now? So I think.
I appreciate that. And I don't really consider it board processing time. I consider it board prioritizing time and board decision-making time. Because there may be a disagreement. I mean, I may want to cut the floating nurse, and Dr. Ryan may want to cut the special education teacher, and Mrs. Comment might want to cut the pickleball court, I'll be kidding. And,
Or add something, or add something.
or somebody might want to add something,
Right.
right? So I think it's because that's one of our jobs.
And if I did want to cut a special ed person or staff member, then tonight would be the night for me to raise that issue, since this was the presentation for it.
Correct.
And when Mrs. Conway had issues with pickleball, then she would have addressed those when we talked about the athletic budget in terms of that. So there is time built in, and if you have issue with the social worker, now, or the nurse, now is the time to express that.
Okay.
This is the
All right,
time
well,
built in.
I was unable to participate in the last meeting and missed the meeting before that, so I guess I'm SOL. All right. Okay, moving on. All right, so now we get to the money part, or the first one. You're taking 7 million of the 11 million that you need for the capital projects is coming out of the capital reserve fund, yes? And that takes a proposition to the voters to use the money that we already have.
That's correct.
Okay. The other $4.2 million is coming out of our undesignated fund balance.
Correct.
When we take out that $4.2 million out of our undesignated fund balance, are we still going to have in excess of 4%
Yes.
in our undesignated fund balance? So we're not in danger of putting the district in a precarious fiscal predicament by not having our savings account, if you will, properly funded.
That's correct, the way you
Okay.
stated that.
Great. But then we get to, this is just genius. I love your budgeting. We're also going to be taking, when we get to the revenue side, we're also going to be taking $1.1 million out of the undesignated fund balance to appropriate.
That's
To make
correct.
it appropriate, to the appropriated fund balance. And just for those of you who haven't sat through these presentations for 8 years like me, who finally understand, what we're doing with that appropriated fund balance is that we're basically returning extra money we had to the taxpayers in the form of, we're decreasing the budget by the amount.
Decreasing
of
the
that.
tax, offsetting the budget.
All right, okay. So if we're using that, and I also, because I was one of those people that didn't understand why you didn't want to leave it at 3 million. And now I see why you took it down so low, because if we needed to bring it back up, that's so genius. But my question is, that's now like $5.3 million that comes out of undesignated fund balance, both for good causes, and it's going to leave us
Correct.
still with enough money in the undesignated fund balance. What happens, so we have a zero last year, we have a
Yes.
zero this year. what happens next year when we don't have money for the appropriated fund balance, and we don't have any more money in the undesignated fund balance? I understand it's not supplementing the operating budget.
Right.
Because Mr. DeVito taught me, never use your
Right.
undesignated fund balance to supplement your operating budget.
Right.
So what happens next year to our tax
Sure.
level?
So, I appreciate the question, thank you. So what we have for next year, we'll put together a budget, and I imagine, I don't know why the pointer's not working, that it'll be not 152 million, right? Because that 4.2 million, 285,000 is going to be out, right? That's out, because that's a one-shot. That's a one-shot expenditure, one-shot revenue source. Now we're going to be back down to maybe 147 million, let's say, right? So that 147 million now will be relying on, again, probably that 1.1 million. I'm probably not going to increase that. Maybe in future years we'll be able to take it down again, but let's just say we keep that where it is. We'll see what's happening with state aid, right? Again, I'm relying on that 3% increase in foundation aid because that's real. All the other increases and decreases are related to expenditure, and it fluctuates. The LIPA pilot, I don't anticipate a decrease, so that revenue should be there. The other revenue, like I said, I was conservative in the current year because I wanted to wait, but now I think we're normalized at a new level in terms of the tuition we get. And all the other revenue codes, there are about 30 different revenue codes that, small codes that make up that number. So it's likely that we're gonna raise that tax levy so that we can bridge whatever gap we need for the new needs. But what's important is that 4.2 or 4.3 million, if you round up, goes away, right? So it drops.
So that would still, because now that we're closing in on $150 million budget, instead of, we used to always round off our 1%
That's tax levy.
increase
That's
of the
tax levy.
tax levy.
That's tax
Oh,
levy.
that still would be
Yeah,
the tax.
it's still a good number to use.
Right, okay, so it wouldn't go up to 1.5 million.
Right,
That's what I was thinking.
It's a tax levy.
So you're anticipating that you would have a normal tax increase next year? You wouldn't have?
Yes.
My concern is that there's gonna be a
Mhm.
spike, and I get it, that you're taking the 4 million away.
Right.
But that still gives you,
So take the
2%.
4 million away and you still, whatever we are for new needs for next year, right?
Which is
So-
probably gonna be 2%.
Right.
Yeah. So then that's still 2% this year, once you take the 4 million away, and then 2% next year is 4 million.
No, it's just the 2% for next year, just for
Okay.
next year. Because if you take that 4 million away, right, then you still have the state aid, you still have the LIPA pilot, you still have the other revenue. You still have, about 1.1 that we're appropriating from fund balance, and you're starting at a 0 with the tax levy.
Oh,
So then you
that's
could
the
say any
2% for this year.
any additional need, right, is going to be, at that point, maybe a little bit of state aid, maybe a little bit of LIPA, but mostly that'll be the tax levy. And the reason why we're doing it again this year is because we know the community, again, is still trying to recover from COVID. We're still trying to get back to normal. And if we're able to do anything to give back to our community in terms of, and what I say is really enjoying some sort of a tax break. I look at it as a tax break. It's really last year for this year, and then again for next year that we can do it. And I know that that's really when the community can really appreciate it.
I agree.
And then, there's only so long you can do it, but I'm grateful that we can do it one more year.
I agree. That was a great explanation, thank you. You know how sensitive I am to numbers in the newspaper.
Yes.
I did read, not recently, it was back in February, I did read the Herald said that we were getting a 1.88% increase in state aid, and
Right.
you say 1.62. Is that just like updated numbers change?
No, you know what it is? It's just my 1.62 is based on the increase from where we thought we were last year, and it's easier to use the numbers where we were last year as opposed to the restated state numbers, right? So in essence, but the state has restated our numbers. I use where we were last year just because it's easier to take numbers from where we were last year because it then decreases, it equals that one, the
Okay.
budget for last year.
And
budget for
when
this year.
my last question is, when in Newsday, when they print our tax information, it will say we're going up 5% or it will say we're going up 2%?
Well, that's the budget, right? So
Right.
the budget is going up 5% because we need to put those capital expenses in our budget. You know, we have to account for it. We have a revenue source equal,
Right,
right? But we have but
Right.
that's for the budget, for the tax levy.
right, it'll still
Yeah.
say zero, right?
We
Yes,
hope.
yes,
Now,
yes.
again, when I had to fill out some paperwork for March 1st, I had to give them a projection, and I think I may have put, 0.9 or 0.8 because I didn't know where we were. I didn't know where we'd end up. I didn't know, because we didn't do the revenue part yet. So I hope that they then present the information. That's what we report on our property tax report card, which is something that we have to do after adoption, as opposed to the numbers that we submitted March 1st. And that's why sometimes, myself and my colleagues, we get upset when Newsday publishes information that was a projection in March and not what happens as a result of a budget adoption.
Well, that just makes your job that between budget adoption and budget vote that
Right.
much more important because you get out,
Get the word that we're at
get
a
the
zero.
word out
That
we're
is a
at
zero,
Yeah.
flat.
Great, nice job.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, I'll go. Mrs. Kozik, I wanted to thank you for your math presentation. It's nice to see kids enjoying math and making it fun. Thank you. Thank you for your work and your efforts. And the presentations were enjoyable. I can always say that for math in terms of my own personal experience. Just a couple of questions. Thanks for your presentation. I just wanted to ask sort of a question concerning Fed interest rates and how that's going to impact us as a district. I mean, we read in terms of the Powell's action, in terms of the Fed interest rates were increased to 0.5% or whatever it is. How does that impact us?
I don't think it will impact us that much. If interest rate goes up a bit, it may trickle down to a little bit more of an interest that we earn on the money that we have in our bank accounts. But I don't really see that. In terms of borrowing, borrowing costs may go up. If we go out for a bond in the future, it may be higher somewhat than if we had gone out for a bond, let's say this year, or what we did in the past in terms of some of the financing we did. But since we don't need tax anticipatory notes, we don't go out for revenue anticipatory notes, it's not really going to have an immediate impact or significant impact on the
All right, thank you. I just wanted to address the nursing. I don't think we can ever have enough nurses on staff, and I kind of like having the floaters around in terms of just in case there's an emergency. You used another metaphor. I always use the metaphor of a hostage as far as the school nurse was concerned, Dr. Natali, because they could never leave. They couldn't leave their office. They couldn't go out for lunch because they always had to be that man. So this gives them a little opportunity to see how the other half lives. I think it's a wonderful thing. I think it was a wonderful decision by the part of the collective bargaining people in terms of to adjust the nurses' salaries, because for too long they were working for a pittance. And to make their salaries more competitive, I think was recognition of their service and a recognition of their needs. So I think that was one of the highlights of the collective bargaining agreement from my own personal perspective, and I applaud that. I just wanted just to reference one of the issues that Mrs. Rona made in terms of looking forward. One of my concerns is political. With Kaminsky and Miller no longer in the positions they're in, I'm kind of worried about the aid, the state aid we're going to get, and who's going to lobby for us. So I hope that isn't going to be a reality, but I'm concerned in terms of who's going to be up in Albany lobbying for Long Beach. So that's certainly a concern for me going forward. Okay, Ms. Conway?
Mr. DeVito, I feel like you need a break after all those questions from
That's okay.
Mrs. Verona. But I do enjoy listening to you go back and forth because she does ask very thorough questions.
Yes, she.
And you do. But you also do an excellent job.
Thank you.
Your transparency is wonderful. I remember a long time ago before you came on board, we didn't really have that type of transparency. And when you came, you were like a breath of fresh air because you started outlining and putting things on slides and letting us know where all the money was going. And I appreciate that as a taxpayer as well, so thank you. I really don't have many questions because you have been so thorough. I do want to know though, with our decreasing enrollment, do we still feel the need? I mean, I understand, not feel the need, but can you explain as to why we are still putting in for another teacher even though we do have decreasing numbers?
You mean special ed teacher?
In special ed, yes.
Yeah, that's more of a function of the new elementary schedule. Is that we do have a new period now, and some people call it the purple period. That's kind of the lingo that we're using now. But we have an additional period. We have additional instructional time. We calibrated our elementary schedule, and on the special ed side, we need to cover. Right? We talked about it when we talked about elementary teachers, that we need a certain number of elementary teachers in order to cover the schedule, and we do need that at Lindell and at Lido because we have special classes there, and we need to cover for that additional time. That was the recognition that came from the group, from EPS, from HR. That's the number that we need, and it's more a function of the schedule and less a function of the number of students.
Oh, okay, thank you. And I also want to echo Dr. Ryan's sentiments about the nurses. We do need more nurses, especially in these times from COVID, where I don't think that is just going to be this year alone. I think we're going to be seeing it for a few years to come. Just a statement really regarding the tax levy. I'm so happy that again it's 0% because our community really has had quite enough to deal with during this pandemic time. But is there a way to ensure that our community truly understands that it's not going up 5%, that their tax levy is only 0%, especially since you just said that New State is going to might mess up the numbers? May?
Well, between adoption and the budget hearing, we do a big public relations effort. We have a newsletter, 2 newsletters that go out. We do budget presentations. Usually we get coverage in the Herald. We do different types of social media, whether it's a tweet or a post and things to get the word out on our Facebook. We do what we can do to get the word out. And then it's up to really our friends and neighbors in our community, to really talk about it. PTA is always a big resource for us in terms of them sharing the knowledge. They have a huge network. People talk to their PTA representatives. There's communication there. They have their own websites and own accounts, social media accounts. And we're just going to hope that people understand that whatever we're asking for when we have the May vote, it's a 0 tax impact. Again, if they're voting and approving the budget, if they do that, it's a 0 increase in the tax levy. If they vote yes on Proposition 2 for the capital projects from our capital reserve fund, it's again 0 tax impact. It's money we have on hand. And we hope to just rely on our networks to get that word out.
I hope people realize how much work you have done to make sure that we have 2 years in a row of a 0% tax levy. That's a very difficult feat to accomplish, and you have accomplished it, you and your team. So I really want to thank you for that.
Thank you. I also have to thank the federal and state government for helping out with additional revenue. I can't take all the credit.
We are going to need someone to continue to fight for us in Albany. And Mr. Kovic, the students who presented today, they showed such enthusiasm for those programs. Thank you so much for giving that to our students.
Okay, Ms. Pace?
I have no questions. Thank you so much for your very thorough presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And thank you for bringing the students with you.
I just have 2 other issues. One is, will the line by line be on the district website?
Yes, it'll be on by tomorrow.
By tomorrow, because I think that's what.
Yes.
And I just wanted to say in terms of, I wanted to applaud, Mr. DeVito, the superintendent, all the stakeholders in terms of the budget preparation. But we oftentimes work in the shadow of the city of Long Beach, and the town of Hempstead. So we're oftentimes more mindful of taxes, what tax increases are going to be in those parts of town in terms of what the city is projecting. And it sort of makes us work even more diligently to present a responsible tax, because we know that the citizens in town can only afford just minimal tax increases at this time, in terms of whether it was Sandy or COVID, unemployment or whatever it might be. That it's, I think it's certainly a credit to the entire district, the superintendent, Mr. DeVito, all central administration and building people, to come in as a no tax increase, particularly in light of the city and the surrounding areas in terms of what's going on financially. I think it's very fiscally prudent and fiscally responsible. So I just wanted to pat us all on the back for that. So thank you very much. Student organization announcements? Any? Questions and comments from the public on tonight's agenda only? No. Approval of minutes for executive session and regular meeting of March 8, 2022. May I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Ms. Pace? Mr. Pinto?
Yes.
Ms. Verona?
Yes.
Ms. Conway?
Yes.
I vote yes. Presentations of the superintendent?
I'd ask the board to consider personnel matters certificated as amended.
Okay,
The
and
additional teacher for the physics science research.
Right,
Physics,
Regents review.
yes.
Regents review physics teacher.
Oh, okay, great.
I'll make that motion.
May I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
I have a couple questions. Oh. I'm sorry. With respect to 1G, the Regents Review, is this a COVID-related,
Yes,
item?
yeah,
And
so,
is it being paid for out of the ARP grant?
so I'll answer the first part, yes. As you know, we, a few years ago, eliminated the after-school Regents Review classes because Regents Review really needs to happen in the classroom when all students are there. However, again, in a year where students haven't taken Regents in 2 years, where there's a lot of anxiety over this, we did feel that offering this preparation in this particular year was important for our kids, at least to make them feel confident. I do not know where this funding is. Mr. DeVito, is this in ARP or is it in our budget? Probably in ARP because we didn't plan for it.
We didn't have it in our budget.
Yeah, Regents Review. I think it's in the ARP money because we did put in the ARP grant money for high school tutoring and that would fall into this.
Well, I thought we had gotten rid of it like a few years ago and that our scores had increased.
We did.
After we
did.
okay. So in order to add it
Yeah,
back
I think
every
it's, I
year.
think it's in the ARP grant.
It is.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Any other discussion? Okay, Ms. Pace? Mr. Pinto?
Yes.
Ms. Verona?
Yes.
Ms. Conway?
Yes.
And I vote yes.
And I'd like to introduce happily Mr. Jake Barron, who is our new coordinator of special education. Welcome, Jake. Okay, I'd ask the board to consider non-certificated.
I'll make a motion. We have a second.
Second.
Second, Ms. Verona, any discussion? Ms. Pace?
Yes.
Pinto?
I vote yes, with the exception I vote no for Joanne.
Okay. Ms. Verona?
Yes.
Ms. Conway?
Yes.
And I vote yes.
And item 3, approval of budget transfers.
I make the motion. Any second?
Second.
Okay, second, Ms. Pace. Any discussion? Okay, Ms. Pace?
Yes.
Pinto?
Yes.
Ms. Verona?
Yes. Yes.
Ms. Conway? And I vote yes. Board of Education additional old business. I just want to commend the high school kids who performed in the Adams Family. It was kind of nice to participate in an auditorium, mask-free, and to see kids having a good time on stage, mask-free. So that was a certainly enjoyable night for everybody in district. Any other Board of Education comments?
I have, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, just a shout out to Odyssey and the Mind teams. I know we played really well out there and keep up all the great work.
I have a couple of just 2 quick things. We used to, in the pre-COVID days, have meetings in each of our buildings. And I know the district clerk has been asking us for a while if we're going to continue that. I think that we should. I think it's time for us to get out and be more visible to the community. So I don't know how other people feel about that.
Could we do that this year?
We should be able to, right? Stolen, we can move our meetings.
Sure.
I don't even think on the calendar they're listed as here. I think they're just listed as
I
board
did
meetings.
revise the calendar, that's posted.
Yeah. All right, so who would do that? Would Mrs. Dolan do that, Dr. Ryan, or
Well,
you and
first,
Dr.
is there, I hear you and Mrs. Conway for the other trustees in support of it?
I have no objection.
I have no objection.
Okay, so how many meetings do we have for the rest of the year?
5.
Yeah, I would just recommend that the last 2 meetings be here because we invite a large number of students for awards and our retirees and tenures.
So could our April 12th meeting be either, I mean, I think we haven't been to Lindell, we haven't been to East, and we haven't been to West.
Oh, we were at Lindell in August.
Okay,
I
then,
remember
then
that
East-
meeting very well.
Yes.
okay, I do too, now that you've brought it back to my memory.
Yes.
So could we go to either East or West for budget adoption? Excellent, thank you. Also, I did notice on last meeting when I was here remotely and unable to communicate, that we adopted the calendar and the board meetings for next year, but we didn't have any summer meetings. How do we go about scheduling those July and August meetings?
The board just really has to let me know what dates people are away and what dates are available, and we can schedule those.
Okay, so that's what we should do. We should each send you an email with our schedule for the summer?
Yeah, and then I'll just propose summer meeting dates and get feedback.
Okay, and it's one meeting in July and one meeting in August,
That's right.
other than the reorg?
Correct.
Thank you.
I just have a couple of questions and comments. First, I want to thank all of our social workers. It was Social Worker Week, and our social workers often work behind the scenes, above the scenes, inside the scenes. So I really want to give a big shout out to them for all of their hard work. I also want to thank all of the coaches for their work getting our students ready for their spring sports. I know the kids are really looking forward to having a real season this spring, so thank you to all of our coaches for that. I just have 2 questions. One is for Dr. Romanelli and one is for Mr. DeVito. First, Dr. Romanelli, what are some learning projects that you have with the students involved with the greenhouse?
Well, we actually just had some students from Lido visit over at the greenhouse, just even this week at the middle school. They're learning about plants. They had a great hands-on presentation in the greenhouse, so we've been utilizing that and combining the forces at Lido and the middle school. So that's been the most recent exciting project we've had going on.
That's great, thank you. And Mr. DeVito, with all the work that we've done at the high school lately, which is wonderful, by the way, but we are suffering, well, not suffering, but we don't have signage for the bus lanes. So, where right between the gym and the school building, that's often just the bus lane. We are missing signage to show that. Is there a way that we can possibly paint that road or put up some big signs that say only buses allowed?
Well, I will say, Mrs. Conway, that we have 3 signs that say bus lane only. So when you enter,
They're very small.
when you enter
Yes.
from Lagoon Drive West, there's a sign that says bus lane only. Then we have a security guard there, right? And the security guard that's there, if it's some vehicle that's not a bus, will direct them out that other gate. We then have 2 other signs that say bus lane only, just in case by chance a car makes it through. We are planning to paint lines when we repave at the end of this coming summer. So at the end of this coming summer, we're going to complete all of the work, the drainage work, the traffic work, the sidewalk work, all of the safety work that we've been talking about over at the high school. That all gets done this summer, and we're going to be repaving and doing a new coat on the entire roadway parking surface, and we will be painting some new lines. I'll see what we can do to put some temporary signage up right there in between the building and the gym, just to make it clear. There's also a very faded white sign at the entrance from Lagoon Drive West into that we're going to paint something there so that it's larger, right? So that people then have something additional. And then what we'll do is we'll take down those 3 small signs and put up a new sign once everything has been completed. So, we do have 3 signs there. We can put in some additional until we're all done. And then when everything is finished, we'll be able to put up some nice bold signs so that people know, so we can be super safe.
That would be great, just because spring season is a very busy season and you have a lot of traffic over there. All right, thank you.
Just concerning that, in terms of summer school and summer programs, is the high school going to be off limits this year, or this summer?
Yes, Dr. Ryan, pretty much off limits. There may be a week here or there that we'll be able to have some access, to the gym perhaps, to the fields. We're working on that, and we're going to play that by ear a little bit. But just to keep everybody safe, we are going to be formally arranging that all programs take place outside of the high school.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else with comments?
I just want to welcome our new administrator, Mr. Barron. Welcome to the district.
Any questions or comments from the public? Anybody? No. Announcements, Long Beach Classroom Teachers Association? No. Administrative Supervisory PPS Group? No. LBSEA, Long Beach School Employees Association, Group C? No. Parent Teacher Association? No. They have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. No, I meant to call you today. Yes, they gave me the parent. I've been in it.